Okay, so you're learning English, right? And you probably hit that wall, that big question. How do I actually start sounding well, like a native speaker?
Yeah, get that natural flow, that confidence.
Exactly. But without, packing everything up and moving across the world, it's like the number one thing people ask.
It really is.
Yeah.
It feels like this huge mountain to climb. And all the advice out there, sometimes that feels just as overwhelming, doesn't it? Like, where do you even begin?
Totally. And that's why we're doing this. For this
Yeah.
deep dive, you, our listener, you actually brought us a whole bunch of really interesting stuff. Notes, articles, different takes on cracking this very problem.
Yeah, some quite different angles, even a few things that sound, well, a bit out there at first glance.
So that's our mission today. We're going to dive into all this material you sent over. We'll pull out the strategies, see how they connect, try and build a roadmap, really.
A clearer picture of how you can piece all this together to speak English confidently, naturally, wherever you happen to be living.
Okay, let's get straight into it. There's a story in one of the sources that really jumps out. It starts with the author meeting this young woman, this was maybe 10 years ago, in Southeast Asia.
Right, the author was teaching English there. And this student, well, she apparently spoke English like she was from North America. Just flawless.
Yeah, the author was completely floored. It wasn't just the grammar or like the perfect pronunciation, though, that was spot on, too.
It was more than that, the rhythm, the intonation. She even used slang and casual phrases like a native. It felt completely intuitive, like she just got how people actually talk over there.
Even though she'd never ever lived in the US or Canada. Mind-blowing, really.
Absolutely. So, of course, the author had to ask, how on earth did you do this?
And her answer. So simple. Almost too simple.
She just said, it's simple. I live with it.
I live with it. Wow. That really lands, doesn't it? It's the very first big idea in this source, and it seems like everything else kind of flows from that.
It really does.
So what does that actually mean, living with it? According to the source, what's involved?
Well, it's basically about surrounding yourself with English constantly, every single day.
So creating your own immersion bubble.
Exactly. The source talks about weaving English into everything you do. You're listening to it, you're speaking it, thinking in it, reading, writing. It becomes part of your everyday existence.
Not just something you study for an hour a day.
No, much deeper than that.
Yeah.
It's about simulating that feeling of being in an English-speaking country, even when you're not.
Yeah.
Making it unavoidable, almost.
So it's less about geography and more about your daily environment and habits. And the source highlights one specific thing as being maybe the most crucial part of this.
That's right. Making friends. Specifically, friends who speak English.
Ah, okay.
The source is really clear on this. Having real, spontaneous conversations, building actual connections, using the language that's labeled as the most important thing for getting that native-like fluency.
It pushes you beyond just knowing the rules, right? You have to actually use it, react, communicate dynamically.
Precisely. Because, that's what language is for, fundamentally.
Yeah.
Connecting with people. So using it to build those connections makes perfect sense as a key driver for fluency.
But the source also throws in a dose of realism here. It's not like make an English-speaking friend and you'll be fluent next week.
Oh, definitely not.
Right.
It flat out says achieving that kind of level quickly is impossible. It takes, and I quote, a long and hard time.
Right.
And it also mentions that this whole living with it idea works best once you've already got a decent foundation. Basic grammar, some vocabulary, pronunciation fundamentals.
So you need the building blocks first.
Yeah. Then the immersion, the frequency of use, the authentic interaction, that's what refines it, polishes it up to that near-native level.
Okay, building on a solid base. And you mentioned vocabulary there. That leads us right into the next key tip from the source.
Right, vocabulary. Obviously crucial. But there are smart ways to approach it. The source says, don't just try and memorize every single new word you bump into.
Which is tempting, but probably overwhelming.
Totally. Instead, it advises focusing first on the really common everyday words, the stuff you use all the time.
Like the example they give of the Chinese friend who could just rattle off, "Hi, how are you doing?" without even thinking.
Exactly. It becomes an automatic reflex because of repetition, because you use it constantly. Master those high-frequency words and basic phrases first. Get comfortable with simple, everyday communication.
And then you branch out.
Then you start strategically adding vocabulary for, say, your job or hobbies or whatever specific areas you need or are interested in. Build the foundation, then specialize.
Makes sense. And when you are learning those new words, the source has a pretty strong take on the best tool to use. It's about dictionaries.
Yes, a really important point. It strongly pushes for using an English-only dictionary whenever possible.
Instead of just relying on a bilingual one. That feels like the quicker option for a lot of learners. Why the emphasis on English only?
Well, the source argues that a bilingual dictionary gives you an equivalent word in your language, right? But English words, like words in any language, often have multiple shades of meaning, different nuances depending on the context.
Ah, okay. One translated word might not capture all of that.
Exactly. It might even be misleading sometimes. The goal, according to the source, isn't just to know what an English word represents in your language, but what it truly expresses in English, the feeling, the image, the full concept.
So understanding its personality almost, its place within the English language itself, not just its translation equivalent.
Precisely. It's a deeper level of understanding. And that ties directly into another technique the source really champions, visualization.
Visualization, okay, how does picturing things help with vocabulary?
The idea here is that people who are really fluent don't constantly translate in their heads. When they hear or read a word like dog, they don't think, okay, that translates to word for dog. They just picture a dog.
Right, they connect the English word directly to the concept or the image.
Exactly. They bypass that translation step.
Okay, I can see that for concrete things like dog or the banana example they use. But how do you actually train your brain to do that? Especially for abstract words.
It's a process. Takes practice. The source suggests this. You encounter a new word. You can look it up, sure, maybe even check the bilingual dictionary first just to get a basic handle on it.
Okay.
But then, the crucial step, you actively visualize the meaning. Use images, feelings, concepts you already understand from your own life and language. Picture what that word means.
And then?
Then you've consciously link that mental image, that visualization, directly to the English word itself, its sound, how it's spelled.
Yeah.
You're forging a direct connection.
So with the banana example, hear banana, maybe initially think of your word for it, but then immediately focus on your existing mental image of a yellow curved fruit.
And deliberately associate that image directly with the sound and spelling of banana.
You're essentially reprogramming your brain to skip the middleman, the translation step.
That's a great way to put it. You're wiring the English words straight to the meaning.
Okay, this is starting to form a clearer picture. We've got live with it immersion, friends. Strategic vocabulary, common first. English dictionaries, visualization. What comes next in this natural progression?
Logically, it flows right into tackling that internal chatter, that constant translation habit that trips up so many learners.
Oh, yeah. The mental gymnastics of forming a sentence in your first language and then trying to convert it word by painful word into English. It's exhausting.
And as the source points out, really ineffective. It slows you right down, makes conversations feel awkward and stilted.
Plus, languages just don't map one-to-one. Direct translation often sounds weird or is just plain wrong.
Absolutely. It leads to unnatural phrasing, grammatical mistakes.
Yeah.
The source says it puts you at a real disadvantage in any kind of real-time interaction.
So the aim is to shift gears, to actually start thinking directly in English. How does the source describe what that actually feels like or involves?
It talks about it as combining reasoning and critical thinking in English. So forming the thoughts, structuring the sentences from the get-go in English. It also mentions integrating that visualization we talked about, and even body language. It's about originating the thought in English, not just translating it.
That sounds like a huge mental shift if you're used to translating. How do you even start?
Practice. Mental rehearsal, basically. The source suggests consciously practicing forming simple thoughts and sentences directly in English, just in your head.
Like talking to yourself internally, but in English.
Kind of, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, doing this repeatedly, it starts to become more automatic. You're essentially carving out a new pathway in your brain, training it to default to English mode more readily.
And the dialogues in one of the sources give some really good practical examples of the struggle and how to overcome it. We meet Sophia, right? The French intern.
Yes. Sophia's experiences are so relatable. That first time she tries to order coffee. Classic translation issue.
Instead of just saying black coffee.
She pieces it together, literally from French. Coffee with no milk, no sugar. Understandable, yes, but definitely not how a native speaker would say it. Clunky.
And then trying to write that email, you can almost see her thinking in French first. She gets tangled up, makes mistakes, like, thank you for your information.
Exactly. That hesitation, the slightly awkward output, it perfectly shows what happens when you're trying to translate on the fly. It's like your brain keeps hitting potholes.
So what advice does she get? Her colleague Jack offers a really simple starting point.
Jack's tip is great because it's so low pressure. He basically says, just start narrating your immediate surroundings to yourself in English.
Like, look around the room.
Yeah, that's a chair.
Yeah.
Sky is blue. I am typing. Just practice forming those basic short sentences internally. Get comfortable with simple English structure without the stress of speaking out loud yet.
Just observing and describing. And Emma, another character who apparently cracked this, shares her method too.
Emma's approach really underlines the power of making it a daily habit. She made a conscious effort every single day to think in English about simple things.
Like her daily routine.
Exactly. Mentally saying, I'm drinking coffee. Now I'm walking to work. This food tastes good. Start small. Start concrete. Consistently activate that English thinking part of your brain.
So it's not about diving into deep philosophical debates in English in your head from day one?
Not at all. It's about building that muscle memory for basic descriptions, basic actions first. Training your inner monologue.
Like mental pit-ups for your English brain.
That's it, exactly.
Okay, so we've got immersion vocabulary with visualization, thinking directly in English. But the source flags something else, something more psychological, as a huge roadblock for a lot of learners.
Yeah, this one's massive. Confidence. Or rather, the lack of it.
The fear of making mistakes.
Exactly. Shyness, worrying about sounding stupid, being embarrassed for the goal. The source identifies this as a major reason people just don't practice speaking, and so they don't improve.
It's that classic catch-22. You're too scared to speak, so you don't get the practice you need to get better and feel less scared.
Right. But the source pushes back hard against that fear. It makes a really crucial point.
Which is?
Most native speakers are actually really pleased when you try to speak their language. They're not sitting there waiting to judge your grammar. They appreciate the effort.
That's so true. People are generally supportive. Nobody's going to laugh at you for trying.
Almost never. The fear is usually way worse in your head than the reality. So the core advice is simple. Just speak.
And speak up loudly and clearly. Don't mumble because you're nervous.
Right. Project confidence, even if you have to fake it a bit at first. And the source gives some concrete ways to build that confidence through practice.
Okay, like what?
First, talking to yourself in front of a mirror. Sounds a bit odd, maybe, but it lets you get used to seeing yourself speak English, watch your mouth movements, your expressions, without any external pressure.
Okay, low-stakes practice.
Then, practicing with English-speaking friends or family you trust. People who will be supportive and maybe give you some gentle corrections in a safe space.
Makes sense. What else?
Talking to other non-native speakers. The source suggests this is helpful because you're often at similar levels and there's less intimidation, and you might even help correct each other.
Shared experience.
Yeah. But the source really emphasizes that the fastest track to boosting confidence and fluency is
Talking to native speakers.
bingo.
Huh.
It explicitly says learners who dare to talk to native speakers improve the most rapidly.
Because you pick up the real rhythm, the current slang, the idioms, stuff you just don't get from books.
Exactly. You learn how people actually talk. The takeaway is crystal clear. Shyness holds you back. You have to be pushed past it.
And Sophia's story, again, from the dialogues, really brings this confidence part to life, doesn't it? She's nervous about work calls, meetings.
Yes, but her colleagues, Kylie and David, they don't just tell her to be confident. They help her practice.
Right, they do role-playing, practicing phone calls, prepping for that big meeting with the boss, Mr. Smith.
And they make it fun, supportive. They remind her to smile, relax. It's about building positive associations with speaking.
And it works. In the actual meeting with Mr. Smith, she's nervous, sure, but she gets through it. She explains her project clearly, handles the interaction.
And the result? Mr. Smith is impressed. He actually compliments her English and her confidence.
That's huge.
It really is. And her colleagues celebrate with her, reinforcing that the practice paid off. It shows perfectly how doing those targeted practice runs, building confidence safely, translates directly into better performance when it counts.
Okay, so the picture from that first source is really comprehensive. Immerse yourself. Live it. Handle vocabulary smartly. Common first, visualize, English dictionary, retrain your brain to think in English, and actively build speaking confidence through practice, especially with native speakers.
It's a really solid foundation.
Now, let's switch over to the second source you brought in, because this one introduces something, well, pretty different. Unexpected, maybe.
Yeah, this one definitely raises an eyebrow at first. It talks about something that sounds, frankly, almost like science fiction.
Learning English while you are asleep.
That's the one. The source dives right into that question. Can you really learn anything useful while you're unconscious?
Right. It sounds like those old myths about putting a book under your pillow and absorbing it overnight.
Huh, yeah. But this source actually looks at the science behind it. It explains that your brain isn't just switched off during sleep. It's actually really busy.
Doing cleanup and organization.
Basically, yeah. Especially organizing memories, consolidating what you learned during the day, that's a key function.
Okay, so it's active, just in a different way.
Right. And sleep isn't just one monolithic block. We cycle through different stages. Deep sleep is vital for locking information into long-term memory. But, and this is the interesting part, the source points out that during the lighter stages of sleep, your brain can still process simple sounds from your environment. It's still listening, in a way.
So even though you're asleep, part of your brain can still pick up on, say, quiet audio playing.
That's the idea. The source mentions the brain is quite good at recognizing patterns, especially if it hears them over and over. So the theory is that hearing language sounds or words during these lighter sleep phases could potentially help reinforce them.
Not like actively studying grammar rules while you're dreaming, then.
No, definitely not active learning. It's more about passive exposure, letting the sounds wash over your sleeping brain, which might still be processing and consolidating those patterns.
Okay, interesting. So based on that science, what does the source claim sleep learning can realistically help with? What are the actual potential benefits?
It's really important to manage expectations here, and the source is careful about this. It stresses this is not a magic bullet. You are not going to wake up fluent.
Okay, good. So it doesn't replace actually studying and practicing when you're awake.
Absolutely not. But it is framed as a potentially helpful tool, a supplement.
Okay. So what specifically might it help with?
The main things mentioned are helping to solidify vocabulary words in your memory, basically reinforcing words you've already encountered while awake.
Makes sense, like an extra repetition cycle.
Yeah. It might also help improve listening skills just by making your brain more familiar with the basic sounds, the rhythm, the cadence of English.
Like tuning your ear passively.
Kind of. And helping your brain recognize common language patterns subconsciously through that repeated exposure.
So it's more about strengthening what's already there, reinforcing recall, maybe improving passive recognition.
That's exactly how the source positions it. Strengthen what you already know and passively absorb some new vocabulary and listening skills. It supports your waking efforts. It doesn't do the heavy lifting.
Okay, so if someone listening thinks, all right, I'm curious, I'll give this a shot, what are the practical steps? How does the source say you should set this up?
It lays out a pretty clear routine. Step 1, prepare your audio material.
What kind of material?
It needs to be simple, easy to understand, matched to your level. Think lists of vocabulary words you're learning, very short and simple conversations, maybe relaxing stories or podcasts designed for learners. Crucially, it has to be slow and clear.
Right, not complex discussions.
Definitely not. The source even suggests you could record yourself saying words or phrases you want to remember.
Oh, interesting. Hearing your own voice might make it stick better.
Could be. Step 2.
Yeah.
Get your sleep environment right. Quiet room, comfortable bed, the usual good sleep hygiene stuff.
And the audio itself?
Play it at a very low volume, just barely audible. You could use regular headphones, or the source mentions those soft, sleep-friendly headbands with speakers built in. The key is low volume enough for your brain to potentially pick up, but not loud enough to actually wake you or disturb your sleep.
Critical point. Volume control.
Absolutely. Step 3, timing. When should you play it?
Just as you're drifting off.
Exactly. Start the audio as you're settling down to sleep. The recommendation is to play it for about 30 to 60 minutes. The idea is to catch those initial lighter sleep stages.
Okay. Step 4 is consistency, I bet.
You guessed it. Like any learning strategy, doing it sporadically probably won't do much. Listen every night if you can, or at least most nights. Progress, if any, will likely be slow and cumulative.
Makes sense. Step 5, make it part of a relaxing routine.
Yeah, integrate it into your wind-down habits. Maybe you read a bit, listen to calm music, then switch on your low-volume English audio as the last step before sleep, and definitely avoid break screens right before.
Good advice, generally.
Totally. Step 6 is interesting. It's about positive affirmations.
Like listening to encouraging phrases. I'm getting better at English.
Exactly like that. Simple sentences. I'm learning English every day. My confidence is growing. I believe in myself. The idea is that hearing these positive messages, even passively, might help boost your motivation and self-belief subconsciously.
Interesting psychological angle. And the last step, number 7.
Track your progress. Or rather, just pay attention.
How so?
Notice over time if words you've included in your sleep audio seem more familiar, when you encounter them while awake. If you feel like your ear is slightly better at catching sounds, it's about noticing those small, incremental improvements, which can be really motivating.
So that's the potential upside in the how-to. But you mentioned the source is careful about expectations. What does it specifically say sleep learning can't do?
Right, the reality check. First, again, you won't become fluent overnight. It's not a substitute for active work.
And it won't teach you complex stuff like grammar rules.
Correct. The source is clear on this. Passively listening while asleep isn't going to magically teach you the difference between, say, the past simple and the present perfect. That requires conscious thought, active learning, practice when you're awake.
So no shortcut to mastering verb tenses while you snooze.
Afraid not. And, very importantly, you cannot rely on sleep learning alone. It has to be a supplement.
You still need to do the reading, writing, speaking, listening when you're awake.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is just one potential extra tool in the toolbox, something to maybe enhance those other efforts. It doesn't replace any of them.
And it might not work the same for everyone.
Exactly. People are different. Sleep patterns are different. Some might find it helps a bit. Others might not notice much. The source says that's okay. Don't get discouraged if it's not revolutionary for you.
Okay, that's a helpful perspective. Before we synthesize all this, let's just quickly loop back to that vocabulary point from the first source, specifically the list of alternatives for the word very.
Ah, yes, that was a great practical example. It came from analyzing a conversation, I think.
Right, and it perfectly illustrates that idea of expanding your vocabulary to be more precise, more expressive. And it ties into visualization too, doesn't it?
It really does. Replacing very happy with thrilled isn't just swapping words. Thrilled paints a much stronger, more specific visual and emotional picture.
Adds more color to your language. So let's run through them quickly. Instead of very happy, you could use
Thrilled.
very small,
Tiny.
very beautiful.
Gorgeous.
Okay, very embarrassed.
Mortified. That one really conveys intense feeling.
It does very unlucky.
Jinxed.
Mm,
A bit more colloquial, maybe.
very serious.
Brave, like a grave situation.
Very funny.
Hilarious.
Very sad.
Sorrowful. Has a slightly more formal or literary feel, perhaps.
Very often.
Regularly.
And very pleasant.
Delightful.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are great alternatives.
They really upgrade your expression.
Absolutely. And making a conscious effort to use these stronger, more specific adjectives instead of just sticking very in front of everything.
Yeah.
That's a simple trick that can immediately make your English sound more natural and sophisticated.
And it forces you to think more about the exact shade of meaning you want, connecting back to that idea of understanding what a word truly expresses, visualizing mortified versus just very embarrassed.
Precisely.
Okay. So we've explored a lot here from the materials you provided. Let's try and pull it all together. What's the overarching toolkit that emerges for you, the listener, wanting to sound more native?
Well, the absolute bedrock coming from that first source seems to be active immersion, that live with it philosophy, creating that English environment daily, and crucially, seeking out real interactions, especially with native speakers.
Right. Then layered on top is the smart approach to vocabulary. Focus on common words first. Use those English-only dictionaries to get the full nuance, the expression of the word.
And actively practice visualizing the concepts, linking the English word directly to the meaning, skipping that translation step.
Which leads directly to tackling the translation habit itself, training your brain through mental rehearsal to actually think in English, starting simple and building up.
Yep. And then there's the huge psychological piece, confidence. Actively working to overcome shyness, accepting mistakes as normal, practicing speaking clearly, and pushing yourself to talk to people, especially natives.
Okay, so those are the pillars from the first source. And then the second source adds.
Sleep learning. Not as primary method, but as this interesting, potentially helpful supplementary tool. Something to passively reinforce vocabulary and listening familiarity while you rest. An extra bit of exposure.
What really stands out looking at all of it is that there's no single magic trick, is there? It's about weaving these different strands together.
Exactly. And the final tips mentioned across the sources really hammer this home. Be patient. Be consistent with the active practice and things like sleep learning if you try it. Combine methods.
Celebrate the small wins, stay motivated, find ways to actually enjoy it.
Yes. And Sophia's story from those dialogues kind of shows it all in action, doesn't it? Her initial struggles, getting advice, practicing with her colleagues, building confidence, and seeing real results in that meeting.
It's a great little narrative arc showing how applying these things consistently with support actually works. Practice, persistence, using the right strategies, it makes a difference.
It really demonstrates the journey.
So, this deep dive has given us a really rich set of tools. From the very active, like making friends and forcing yourself to think in English, to the strategic, like vocabulary building and visualization, right through to the surprisingly passive, like potentially using sleep learning. It seems clear that reaching that natural, confident level of English speaking without moving abroad is a big challenge, but definitely possible if you integrate these different approaches.
It's about building a comprehensive, multifaceted learning system for yourself, touching different parts of your learning process, even when you're asleep.
So here's something to maybe chew on after listening to all this. We've seen the power of combining really active strategies, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, consciously changing how you think with these more subtle background methods like sleep learning. So the question is, how might consciously designing your own learning routine, one that purposefully weaves together all these different threads, the active, the strategic, the passive, how might that change not just the speed, but the fundamental feeling of your progress towards speaking English, not just fluently, but truly naturally?